People always told me that getting old was the hardest part. They were wrong. The hardest part is getting old and realizing the silence in your house is no longer peaceful. My name is Harold. I'm 85 years old, and about 2 years ago, my children stopped coming to see me. What I did about it changed everything I thought I understood about love, family, and what it means to need someone. I want to be careful here because when I say they stopped coming, I don't mean they disappeared. My daughter Linda still calls on Sundays. My son Robert sends me emails with articles he thinks I'd find interesting, usually about history or woodworking, things I mentioned liking 40 years ago and haven't thought much about since. They were not gone. But they were not here either. And if you've ever sat in a chair by a window watching the same street for hours because you have nowhere else to direct your attention, you understand that there is a very specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with whether people love you. I moved into this house in 1974 with my wife Eleanor. We raised 3 children here, Robert, Linda, and our youngest Paul, who passed in 2019 from a heart condition he'd had since his 30s. Losing Paul changed something in all of us in ways we haven't fully spoken about even now. I think grief, when it's shared between people who don't know how to talk about it, becomes a kind of wall. Everyone is standing on their own side of it, thinking they're protecting the others by not bringing it up, and meanwhile the distance just grows. Eleanor died in 2017, 2 years before Paul. So, by the time 2019 was over, I had lost my wife of 51 years and my youngest son in the span of 24 months, and the house, which had always been loud and full and warm in the way that houses are when people actually live in them, became something else entirely. I kept her reading glasses on the side table next to the sofa for almost a year. I don't know why exactly. I think I was afraid that if I moved them, I would have to admit to myself how thoroughly everything had changed. Robert lives about 2 hours away. He has a demanding job, 3 children of his own, and a marriage that I suspect takes more maintenance than he lets on, because I was married for 51 years, and I know what a maintained marriage looks like, and what a strained one sounds like when someone calls you from the driveway because they needed a moment outside the house. Linda is 40 minutes away, which sounds close until you factor in that she works full time, cares for her husband who has had some health struggles and is, like her mother was, the kind of person who absorbs everyone else's needs until she has very little left for anything additional. I knew all of this, I understood all of this, and yet there was an afternoon in January of 2 years ago when I realized I had not had a conversation longer than 4 minutes in 9 days. I know that because I had started keeping a small notebook, not as a diary. I want to be clear about that, just a place to write down things I wanted to remember. And I had started noting, almost without meaning to, when I had spoken to someone and for how long. 9 days. The longest exchange had been with a woman at the pharmacy who asked if I needed help reaching something on a high shelf. I did not need help. I said thank you anyway, and we spoke briefly about the weather. I wrote it down. 4 minutes. I want you to understand that I did not blame my children. I want to say that clearly and mean it, because when I first started feeling this way, I did blame them, quietly, in the way you blame people when you're too proud or too tired to say anything directly. I thought about all the years I had shown up, the school plays, the graduations, the moves across states, the times I drove hours in weather I had no business driving in because someone needed help. I thought about those things and I felt something that I'm not proud of, which was a quiet, hot kind of resentment that I kept telling myself wasn't there. What changed was not a conversation or a phone call or a visit. What changed was a morning when I was sitting at the kitchen table and I was looking at a photograph on the refrigerator. It's a picture from maybe 1989 or 1990. Robert and Linda and Paul are in the backyard, and Eleanor is laughing at something out of frame, and I'm behind the camera, so I'm not in it. But I can tell from the angle that I was crouching down to get the light right, because I always cared too much about photographs, and I looked at that picture and I thought, they don't know how to be here anymore, not because they don't love me, because being here is hard now, because this house has grief in the walls, and I have Eleanor's reading glasses on the side table. And none of us know what to say about Paul. and coming here means facing all of that without any of the tools people normally use to face hard things. That thought did not make the loneliness smaller, but it made it make sense, and something about a feeling making sense, even a painful one, gives you somewhere to stand. I called Robert that afternoon, not to tell him any of what I'd been thinking, not to make him feel guilty, just to call. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and at the end I said, I'd like it if you came by sometime next month, maybe brought the kids. I have some things in the garage I've been meaning to sort through, and I could use another pair of hands. That was it. I gave him something practical, a reason that wasn't about obligation or guilt or my loneliness, just a task, an afternoon in the garage with his father. He came 3 weeks later with his two oldest. We spent 4 hours going through tools and boxes and found a fishing rod I had completely forgotten about that had belonged to my father. Robert held it for a long time without saying anything. Then his daughter asked him if he knew how to fish, and he said yes, his dad had taught him, and he looked at me when he said it, and I thought, there it is. That's what was missing. Not visits, a way back in. After that, I started thinking differently about what I actually needed and what I was asking for, even implicitly. I had been waiting to be visited, waiting in the way that people wait when they feel they are owed something, even when they would never say so out loud. And the waiting had made me smaller somehow. It had made me into someone sitting by a window, which is not who I had ever been. I had spent my life moving toward things, toward Eleanor when I met her at a dance in 1964 and was too nervous to ask her name for an hour, toward fatherhood, which terrified me in ways I never admitted, toward retirement, toward this house, toward everything. And somewhere in the grief I had stopped moving and started waiting. So I decided to stop waiting. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center, which felt absurd at 83. Walking in there with people 30 years younger than me who were learning to make cutting boards as a hobby. And here I am having worked with wood my entire life, and yet I went. And there was a man there named Dennis who is 71 and lost his wife the year before. And we have had coffee after class almost every week since. And he is not a replacement for anything. He is just a person who understands what a certain kind of quiet feels like. I also started writing letters, actual letters, on paper to Robert and Linda and to my grandchildren, not long ones, just notes, really. Something I remembered, something I noticed, a question about their lives that I actually wanted the answer to. Linda wrote back, long emails that surprised me with how much she said in them, things she hadn't told me, how tired she was, how much she missed her mother, how she drove past a restaurant once that Eleanor had loved and had to pull over for a few minutes. I had not known any of that. We had been protecting each other into silence. The visits came back, not all at once, and not the way they used to be when Eleanor was alive and the house had a natural center of gravity, but they came. Linda brings dinner sometimes on a Friday. Robert called last month and asked if I wanted to drive up and spend a weekend, which I did, and I slept in their guest room and ate breakfast with my grandchildren and watched my son in his own life for 2 days and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was that I was still part of something. I'm 85. I have a notebook with timestamps in it from a winter when I was measuring my life in 4-minute conversations. I have Eleanor's reading glasses still on the side table because I decided I'm allowed to keep them there for as long as I want. I have a fishing rod that belonged to my father and then to me and will probably go to Robert when the time comes. I have coffee with Dennis on Wednesdays. I have letters from my daughter that I keep in a folder in the desk drawer. I don't have any advice, not really. I'm not the kind of man who thinks his particular path through something is the path. But I'll tell you what I know from my own life, which is that the people who love you are not always able to find their way to you on their own, especially when the path runs through grief or guilt or the particular exhaustion of modern life. Sometimes you have to reach out a hand, not because you've done something wrong, not because they have, just because that's how it works sometimes, and there's no shame in being the one who reaches first. If there's someone you've been waiting to hear from, that's all I really wanted to say. You might not have to wait much longer than the time it takes to pick up the phone.